This is Still Enrolled.
Welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Brian Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here on a big Monday. Tripp, I know you like to make fun of me and laugh at my expense anytime you use the word big. And I will admit, sometimes is the word big properly used? No. But this weekend, Tripp, this show, it is used to perfection. Oh my goodness. In terms of results we had on the field, few teams becoming bowl eligible, few changes. We saw quarterback coordinator changes play out in front of us. Some other teams keep on rolling here as well. But also, too, a lot of news off the field. Coordinator changes. We'll get into some recruiting changes here as well. Some coaches getting locked up. You talk about a big, busy weekend here, Tripp, this past weekend, including, by the way, you joining Bills Mafia, which may be the biggest revelation of all of them here. It was a hell of a weekend.
Yeah, it was. And you know what? We get lost in this, and there's only 2 weeks of the college football regular season remaining, but early National Signing Day this year is December 4th, quickly approaching. Instead of being that late December, mid-December, December 20th, 21st, 22nd, it's kind of been the last couple of years, whatever you want to classify that as. But early signing day is also quickly approaching here, going into conference championship weekend. And yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about joining the Mafia in just a second.
All right, looking forward to it as well. But like you said, the National Signing Day adds to the chaos right now that has been happening around college football here. And Tripp, let's start this pod with news that happened off the field with a team that did not play on Saturday at all as the Indiana Hoosiers getting set for their big matchup against Ohio State. Don't worry, we got you covered all week leading up to that big top 5 matchup we have in the shoe on Saturday. But how about Indiana, Tripp, committing to football, committing to Curt Cignetti and announcing early Saturday morning, they're not going to allow Curt to flirt. They're not going to allow other teams to come on their campus and try to woo him and steal him away. 8-year, $72 million contract extension. Curt Cignetti going nowhere.
Yeah, how about that? On a day where the Hoosiers have the bye week, where they're idle, they're the team in the Big Ten perhaps making the most noise of the day. As you said, 8 years, $72 million. His initial contract was 6 years, $27 million. That's close to a $3.5 million increase. Oh, yeah, and he gets a $1 million retention bonus for each year in which he returns to Bloomington. My big question, though, in this is what is his buyout? Because ultimately you can pay the coach whatever you want. And this puts him among the top 16 highest paid coaches in college football. But if it's a very affordable buyout, other programs, their boosters, they will still go after Curt Cignetti. The thing with Cignetti, though, is while I don't think he acts as an older coach, he's very relatable to his players. He is not a spring chicken. So it's not like this is the young rising star in the industry. He is 63 years old, right? So this is not that young coach where he has a long-term future in the sport still. So if Indiana can keep him around for a couple more years, and hopefully this is the money to do it and the investments, it's not just the investment that they have to make in a college football head coach. It's the investment that you have to make in your program. This is a great start for Indiana, but how else can they keep up with the Ohio States, Michigans, Penn States, Oregons, USCs of the Big Ten? Facility-wise, stadium-wise, NIL-wise, how much can they invest in that at a school that's traditionally a basketball school? Those are the two important elements, his buyout and then the other investments made in the program around Cignetti to allow them to have staying power among college football's elite.
What I think can get you excited if you're an Indiana fan, Tripp, is what he said on Big Noon Kickoff on Saturday morning. And he was asked basically, hey, what are your thoughts on staying here? And was there any thought of leaving? Because he was one of the most bandied about coaches in terms of, we should go get Cignetti and hire him as our next head coach. And he said, I'm going to read his direct quote here. "We're the emerging superpower in college football. Why would I leave?" End quote. And sure, there are concerns, right? Because Indiana traditionally is not a football school. And like you just said, this is kind of, how much they care about football. This, I think, is the first step, though, in that direction where they make a huge investment proactively, by the way, as well, where, right now there was no, there's no competing offer. There's no school right now that truly was making a push to hire Cignetti at the moment. They were proactive. They made a move, you could argue, earlier than they even maybe could have or should have, considering they just hired him a few months ago. But I think this is a good first sign for Indiana about how serious they are about continuing this college football success they're having. And now all of a sudden, again, I think you look going forward here, there's a real reason to believe what you're seeing this year is not an anomaly, that they can build, on success. Now, obviously, a lot of that's going to have to be on recruiting and kind of developing grassroots here and getting a foundation built. You can't just go into the transfer portal every single year and grab 40 guys and expect success. But I think this is a really good building block. And I think you're seeing in a 12-team playoff, teams like Indiana, I think, can have staying power. So I think if you're right now the Hoosiers, obviously you're fired up. You got your coach here for the long term. I think age could play a part in helping him, stay in Bloomington, maybe longer than otherwise he would if he was 40. And I think right now, things are really, really bright right now if you're an Indiana fan.
Now, this is where he ranks. As I said, $8 million puts him 16th. The highest paid coach in college football is Kirby Smart, $13.28 million per year. And USA Today just released their annual head coaches database just a couple of weeks ago. So Georgia's Kirby Smart, $13.28 million. Clemson's Dabo Sweeney, $11.13 million. Texas's Steve Sarkisian, $10.03 million. Lincoln Riley, same range. Ryan Day, same range. Florida State's Mike Norvell, $10 million. Kalen DeBoer, $10 million. Brian Kelly, $9.98 million. Mark Stoops, $9.01 million. Lane Kiffin, $9 million. Eli Drinkwitz, $9 million from Missouri. Josh Heupel from Tennessee, $9 million. I mean, you start looking at some of those names on that list. Dabo, Sark, Lincoln Riley, Mike Norvell, Brian Kelly. Curt Cignetti now to be among that group. You could argue, too, that there are schools that would rather have Curt Cignetti than the guys they have that are among those top 15 highest paid coaches in college football.
I was going to say, you talk about bargains, right? I think right now Dan Lanning at $8.2 million is probably the best bargain, right? Best value you have right there. But, I mean, Cignetti's not that far away. And, again, I think it's also a tremendous show of an investment when we're talking about some of those big blue-blooded programs. Like every name you just listed, every school you just listed, they've been a traditional football power, either in the past or currently. Indiana is like the one who doesn't belong here on this list, and now you're seeing their investment in football. I think there's no reason to believe it stops here, by the way. You saw there also part of the deal was a bigger pool for assistant coaches. So now it could make it easier for Cignetti either attract, better offense coordinators, defense coordinators if he needs, or retain his guys, which right now I think is what you want to do if you're the Hoosiers. So the investment and the buy-in is real right now from Indiana. And I think right now with what you're seeing, it's not one of those deals that is premature. Like we've seen, schools like Texas A&M and Michigan State jump the gun, give their coaches big time extensions after just one good season and maybe, get over their skis and all of a sudden regret it 4 or 5 years. This trip does not feel like a deal Indiana's going to regret really anytime soon.
No, I feel like there's some staying power there for Curt Cignetti. You already addressed it, building through the portal versus building in recruiting. I'll say this, though, with what he's done, his personality, who wouldn't want to go play for Indiana if you had an additional year or two of college eligibility? If you're someone that's considering making the move up from the JUCO level, where does Indiana, what does their base become in attracting that talent to go to Bloomington? And he's shown that he can win now. Now, it's different when you have to integrate 30, 40 players onto your roster who aren't familiar with your schemes and culture, the way that he was able to attract players from James Madison. What also will change here in college football is this will finally be the last of the COVID years this year. This is the last of the COVID years right now. So you won't see those players with 6, 7, 8 years of eligibility anymore, 5, 6, 7 years. You're going to start to get back in your traditional 4 and 5 year maximum college football players, which also it'll be interesting how that impacts the pool of players that are available in the portal. And if you'll see players now after a freshman year or a sophomore year or that one redshirt year get ready to make that jump, knowing that they don't have a graduate season. Oh, and also a COVID season to tack on to the end of that to continue their careers.
And it's going to be really fascinating to watch. But right now, like you said, there's no real reason to doubt Indiana moving forward. And especially now with a big top 5 matchup coming in, you can really plant your flag in terms of staying power. If you're able to go into Columbus, hell, forget about winning. I think even just competing and proving right there, you are, you can go toe to toe with some of the best teams in the country. Work wonders here for Indiana.
Yeah, and we'll obviously talk a ton about it on Thursday's podcast, but this game for Indiana, the margin that you're talking about there is incredibly, incredibly important in this game. Just the national narrative, the way it still continues after this past weekend to see Georgia get another marquee win, to avoid 3 losses. There is a lot at stake in this game for Indiana, win or lose, but also by how many points they would lose if they were to not go into Columbus and I think shock everyone and finish this thing off and be headed to the Big Ten championship game. But the margin in that game is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. Not to jump the gun here on something that we're just going to continue to discuss once we see the rankings come out tomorrow night, and then what we get to present ourselves with, the challenge that Indiana has going to Columbus this weekend.
Oh, you're definitely right. Indiana's margin against Ohio State will matter. What margin didn't matter on Saturday, Chip, was Oregon's over Wisconsin's. Look, at this point, if you're Oregon, you move to 11-0. A win is a win. But boy, was it ugly. They escaped Madison 16-13, held almost 3 touchdowns below their season average. First game all year, Dylan Gabriel did not throw a passing touchdown. I'll ask you, Tripp, was there any concern watching Oregon struggle against Wisconsin? Or is this kind of classic college football? Hey, you went on the road. You're not going to complain about it. What were your takeaways here from Oregon's close win over Wisconsin?
No, I don't have any concern about the Ducks. This happens in college football. We see it week in and week out. And for Oregon, it was their 8th consecutive game. They played an opponent with a bye week the previous week for the 2nd consecutive week. And you never felt like watching Wisconsin's offense. And I know we're going to detail Wisconsin's offensive struggles here in just a moment, because after the game, Phil Longo let go by Luke Fickell. It felt like Oregon at some point was definitely going to be able to overcome Wisconsin's shortcomings and pull out or eke out, as they did, the win. I never felt like they were in jeopardy, with probably one exception in this game. When Wisconsin took the football in that third quarter and went 16 plays, 62 yards, and amassed 8 minutes and 53 seconds time of possession, all of a sudden I caught myself looking down at the score bug, and I'm like, holy crap, there's only 3 minutes left in the third quarter. All of a sudden, this is starting to look realistic here for the Badgers. However, there were 2 huge turning points. At the end of that drive, a touchdown pass from Locke to Vinny Anthony got taken off the board due to a penalty. That would have made it a 2-score game with essentially 17, 18 minutes left to play in the football game. That would have put Oregon in trouble. And then the other one, you start the fourth quarter, everyone's going nuts, jump around, a 4th down and 9, and Dylan Gabriel, and credit Dan Lanning, I think it was the right decision to go for it. You trust your offense. You needed a play. You needed to flip the script, but he threw that pass to Ferguson for 15 yards on 4th and 9. That ended up being the game-tying scoring drive. James took it in for the touchdown, 13-13. Then Oregon goes down, kicks the go-ahead field goal. And at that point, you thought, well, Wisconsin still's got a chance here to either tie or win it. But they just so inept on offense at the end of the game. And Oregon closed it out. 16-13, wasn't flashy, wasn't splashy, but they got the job done, and they remain 11-0. And despite, I think some websites have said out there they have clinched the Big Ten championship, they'll have a bye, then Washington. They're in the driver's seat, but there is still an improbable 4-way tie in which there's 4 teams, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana, that would all finish with a 1-loss conference record. And then you'd have to go to tiebreaker procedures, which you can't even start to dive into right now because it's based on strength of opponents' records. And there's too many games that still have to be played out where you could identify who would win the tiebreaker among 4 teams at this point.
I can't wait till we pick straws. Short end is out. Sorry. And that's how you determine who gets potentially a first-round bye in the college football playoff. Picking straws. Oh, you got to love college football. It is like the seventh tiebreaker. I think it's not pick and trust. It's like a coin flip or something like that. But it's crazy to think that there's a scenario where a flip of a coin is deciding possibly who has a first round bye. Gotta love it. But to your point,
my question for you actually is,
sure.
Is it fair for us? And obviously, Phil Longo out at Wisconsin. Should we be giving more credit to Oregon's defense, or is it truly just Wisconsin's offense? That, like, we can talk about how poor Wisconsin played offensively in this game, and there's no doubt they have specific limitations because of the quarterback position, and you can point fingers wherever you want, and obviously the blame went on the offensive coordinator after this game. But for Oregon's defense, without Jordan Birch to hold them to 226 yards, 1 for 12 on third downs, Uiagalelei had and I know I can never say the name, an interception, 5 tackles, sack. Wisconsin having opportunity at the end and not even be able to move the ball. They go 4 and out. They get the interception on the last possession. As much as the story is, Wisconsin's offense is bad, part of this also is Oregon's defense is really darn good.
Oh, it is. It is. I think in this game, it's just, Wisconsin's offense is so anemic. They can't do anything well. Braden Locke passed for 96 yards in this game. 96. He's putting the ball in harm's way. This is not a disrespect or discredit to anything that Oregon has done. Again, they played far superior offenses and have looked a lot better. But this, I think, is just what you chalked up to one of those games where Wisconsin's offense stinks. And outside of that one drive, really, that you highlighted, that could have ended in a touchdown, penalty wipes it out. That was like the only good drive they had, and really only driver that looked like a real offense all game. It's just one of those where you look at it and go, oh boy, like they got a lot of work to do. Starting, and like you mentioned, starting and getting a real quarterback. No disrespect to Braden Locke. Look, he's back up for a reason. Second straight year in which Wisconsin's quarterback has gotten hurt. Tanner Mordecai last year didn't miss the entire season, but missed a decent chunk of it. And obviously this year, Tyler Van Dyke out for the year after that Alabama game with the torn ACL. Part of it is like when you're playing with the backup quarterback, there's only so many things you can do. I just look at it as Wisconsin's offense. But also with that said, I'm not really concerned coming out of this with Oregon. Again, they've had a bye in really 2 months. This is now their second, Midwest to East Coast, Midwest trip, we'll say, in the last 3 weeks that they traveled to Michigan. I think they're tired. This bye comes at the perfect time. And I think at this point too, when it's 18 and 22-year-old kids trip, sometimes you're going to have a letdown. Sometimes you're not going to have your A game. And I think it is impressive to where they were down in a hostile environment. You mentioned that crowd was jumping. There was actually real belief. You were there a few weeks ago. We were kind of talking about it too. When Wisconsin had a second half lead, you didn't really feel like the crowd actually believed they could win that game. I felt a different energy from that Wisconsin crowd in the fourth quarter, especially, or in the second half, especially, as they were pushing Oregon and leading in that most of the second half. I felt a different confidence. So it was a real home field advantage for Wisconsin. I think it showed a lot when you're Oregon. Not much is going your way. The offense is nowhere near as efficient and productive as it's been really the entire season so far. And to find a way to win, I thought was really, really impressive here for the Ducks. I don't have much concern. Again, they've been getting better every single week. I think in college football, you are allowed a letdown, if you will. This was their letdown, a good bye week to reset here. I expect a different Oregon team coming out of the bye to finish off the regular season. One thing I'll say before we get to Wisconsin's offense.
I have something to add there.
Okay.
This, it's a letdown. Oh, they didn't play as well. I think this comes back and it's a national problem right now in the sport.
Epidemic?
Yeah, it is. It honestly is. You listen to the discussions about the SEC, Big 12, ACC, Big 10, and some people think it's coach speak. Do you know how hard it is to win? You should never take a win for granted. To go on the road in the Big 10, taking on Wisconsin, it's not like they went in and played an FCS team. It's a Big 10 opponent on the road in front of nearly 80,000 people, and a Big 10 opponent that's going to be in a bowl game. Stop discrediting teams for going and winning football games and looking for flaws in every performance when it is hard to win. It is.
Wisconsin's offense is like FCS.
And I think it's And I think it's because of this. Okay, we're comparing resumes, we're comparing margins, we're comparing teams. And I think that's what's kind of exacerbated this problem this year of, they're going to be 11-1, but that one loss, it is hard to win. So that's why I don't like when we're hearing about, well, what about a 3-loss SEC team? You know what? I don't care who their losses are to and who their wins are against. A team that has only one loss or no losses, start giving them credit for taking care of business and being consistent enough each week, every single week. Each and every week. I don't even know what I'm saying, but give them credit. Give them credit for taking care of their, being consistent and taking care of their business, because it's a real thing. And when you have 3 losses, because that's going to be the discussion, 3-loss SEC team getting into the college football playoff, that you don't have consistency. I don't care who your opponent is. You don't have that consistency that a team that's 12-0 or 11-1 has. So stop looking for flaws when teams actually have the challenge. Winning is tough. Give them, and not every schedule is equal, but winning is tough. So stop putting teams down for that find a way to get it done even when they're not at their best. That's not a you problem. That's a national problem.
Can I defend the national stance for a quick second? I think this is baked into college football. Just because you only have 12 games, right? The sample size is so small, and it is all subjective. Like it is all, we're looking at a committee filled with 13 people that have 13 different opinions of what is good, what is bad. Was this an impressive win? Was this not? The subjectivity, I think personally, it thinks what makes the sport so compelling and interesting is because how you play does matter. It's not the NFL where, hey, all of a sudden, only thing that matters is the win column. So you could win 40-0, you can win 3-0. A win is a win. In college football, it is about not only who you beat, but it's also how you look. And again, for Oregon, the part of the reason why I'm not concerned is because this is their first, again, we'll say lesser performance than we expected, to dress that up nicely. And it came in a win. If they were struggling all season long, I would be sounding alarms, and maybe you would as well, if you're talking about a team that is highly ranked but barely getting by, kind of like Miami, when they've been squeaking by some teams that they are superior than, and it becomes a habit. For Oregon, this is the first bad game they played really since Boise State, and even that game we're talking about now, and you look at Boise State a lot differently than we did back in week 2. So this is, you could argue, the worst game they played since week 1 against Idaho. That's impressive because you don't see that consistency a lot in college football, but because the sport is so subjective, I think it does matter who you play.
I think you just made my argument for me.
No, all I'm saying is you're saying don't give basically Oregon credit, even though they're playing a team that they're far superior than on the road. They deserve more credit than maybe they would otherwise get for barely beating a Wisconsin team. And what I'm saying is that I think you're going to hear criticism, and rightfully so, in part because the sport is so subjective that not only it's who you beat, but how you play matters. Again, I told you, I don't have any concern with Oregon this week. I have no concern about them coming out of this game. But when you talk about teams
they won,
and maybe not getting enough credit, right?
But they won.
We saw last year.
What are we discrediting? They won.
This is a sport that last year we saw an undefeated Florida State get left out of the playoff. They won every game. They won every game. Now the playoff has expanded to kind of mitigate that. But the point, how you look, that right there tells you how you look matters. It's not just about the win column and who you beat. It is how you look in those games. Do you leave no doubt? Dan Lanning's talked about that, leaving no doubt. And they've done that for 99% of the season.
I agree. How you look matters, but if you win, you win. And leaving Florida State out of the playoff last year was wrong.
Oregon won. They did not look great. Neither did Wisconsin. Wisconsin's offense did not look great really in the 2 years Phil Longo has been there, Tripp. And now we saw a change. Luke Fickell announced on Sunday morning, he has relieved the OC of his duties. You're going to have a new OC here for Wisconsin the last 2 weeks, maybe for a bowl game as well, and then obviously look to reassess the offense. Let me ask you this, Tripp, to start. We saw Luke Fickell come in and try to bring an air raid. I'm going to put that in quotes because it wasn't exactly an air raid offense, but an air raid style to Wisconsin that has, for the most part, been a traditional pro-style team. With your Luke Fickell, do you need to adjust what kind of offense, or do you still kind of keep with the air raid notion, just hire a different coordinator? Is it the coordinator that was the problem, or is it the offensive system in your mind that was the problem in Wisconsin?
This is interesting because we had this discussion way back or early in the fall about what teams from the Big Ten.
Bless.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Man,
I
you're getting
couldn't
so
hold it in.
choked up.
I swear
Man.
I couldn't hold it in. We actually, I think it'd be funny to keep in. What you're not going to edit that, are you?
No, listen. This is raw. This is still enrolled. We are not hiding who we are here. If Tripp sneezes on the pod, then damn, we're gonna just let you hear it.
I think way back in the fall, we had the discussion about these teams that are traditionally Midwest Big Ten teams that maybe didn't have the most modern style of offense. How would they adapt to fit in the new era of the Big Ten with your Ohio States, Penn States, Washington, USC? And you know what? I think my mind's kind of changed a little bit. You got to stick with what your recruiting base is to be successful and know what type of players you can attract. I think Michigan proved it last year where they really had an identity. I think you have to be what your program is, but also the type of players that you can bring into that program. If you're Wisconsin, you need to get a bunch of guys who are 6'5", 6'6", 330 to 350 pounds on that offensive line. And I'm not saying you don't still need a skill position guy at wide receiver, a really good athletic tight end, a Brock Bowers, a Tyler Warren, one of the Iowa tight ends, Sam Laporta. I'm not saying that you don't need some of those guys, but Wisconsin is never going to be able to, with the type of talent they can attract, where they're located, their identity is not, let's get 4 wide receivers in the game and try to spread it out and throw the football. It doesn't work weather-wise. It doesn't work talent-wise. It doesn't work scheme-wise. It doesn't work traditionally with their program. Know who you are. And I think if you can do what you do at a really high level and you form an identity and you get players and a team and a culture and you buy into it and build with it, that can still be a successful model for a successful football team. And I think that's what Wisconsin has to get back to.
The reason why I wouldn't change it is in part, isn't that why I hired Luke Fickell in the first place? Didn't they hire Luke Fickell in part to kind of revamp and quote unquote modernize this offense where they wanted, they kind of saw what happened the last, let's call it 20, 30 years. And they felt like in order to compete at the highest level and break through and beat Ohio State, you had to kind of, bring some speed and bring some explosiveness to the offense through the air that they've been missing now for a while. I think there's a happy medium. I think there is where you don't have to, like you said, run 4 wide, throw the ball 50 times a game, and just become a true West Coast air raid offense. I think there is a blend where you can still have a strong running game, but also now have more skill talent, and most importantly, a quarterback under center in the shotgun that can actually make plays on the outside. I think we kind of saw it at Cincinnati, right? I wouldn't say Cincinnati when Luke Fickell was there was an air raid offense. I thought they had a good blend of running the ball well, but also they had Desmond Ridder. You had Alec Pierce. Some of these guys were drafted pretty high on offense in the NFL draft. You can still be a tough physical team, but also have some good skill talent to make plays that you weren't making in the past. So I think if you are Luke Fickell, I don't think you now exactly go the other way and go back to what Wisconsin was. I think you were hired in part to bring more explosiveness in the air to Madison. So I think now it's more just about hiring the right guy. I mean, you've heard reports and you read things coming out of Madison. It did not seem like him and Phil Longo were on the same page really ever. There was a marriage that felt forced. There's a marriage that maybe actually truly didn't mesh with what Luke Fickell wanted to do versus what Longo wanted to do. And the personnel you could question, was it actually even right for this offense? There's a lot of questions, and it felt like there's a lot of disjointedness that if you can at least get some harmony, I think you could still have a happy medium here where you go back a little bit to the old school, but bring some new school elements here as well. And you can find an offense that I think works in this new Big Ten, like you're talking about, where you can still score points, but also kind of rely on your toughness. I think the weather point you bring up is important as well in Madison. It's going to be cold. I know what's, global warming, if you will, wasn't exactly freezing on Saturday night in Madison, but you're going to have some snow. You're going to have some elements there. You got to be able to weather that as well.
Literally.
Let me ask you this. Is this Luke Fickell's last offensive coordinator hire?
Well, that's a really good question. I think he's been so successful.
That's a
really good question.
Because you look at his first one here in Longo, two of the worst offensive outputs we've ever seen. I mean, 23.5 points per game last year was the lowest they've had in 19 years.
But who else are you going to get as your head coach? Like when you start discussing replacing head coaches, it always comes back to me in the discussion of who are you going to replace said coach with? And before you can start having that discussion, you got to give me some names. And what if Luke Fickell doesn't work in Wisconsin? Who does?
It's a fair question. I have no names for you right now, to be honest with you. I asked that question without being prepared in terms of who can replace him. This is also a question we're talking about, I would say realistically 2 years down the road at the earliest.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like you're going to give your new OC some.
Things go sideways next year. There's pressure in Wisconsin.
There is. I mean, we talked about it when we had Colton Bartholomew on before the Alabama game.
But are those expectations still realistic when you look at the modern era of college football? And I guess maybe Indiana changes that scope of it a little bit. But in the modern era of college football, in a conference of 18 teams, I don't look even historically at Wisconsin when they were playing in Big Ten championship games when they had Melvin Gordon and Russell Wilson. I still didn't view them as like they're probably in that 10 to 15 to 20 range. You don't think of them as Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama. They're not in that same tier. So what is a reasonable expectation for Wisconsin year in and year out? Is it to be an 8-win team, a 9-win team, a 10-win team, or to be considered among, like, I think USC has a way higher bar than Wisconsin to live up to. And they have the program, the history, the tradition, the resources where they should be a top 10, top 15 team. Wisconsin, for me, if they're on the cusp of a playoff every maybe 5-10 years, but they're generally one of the better Big Ten teams, but somewhere between 8 and 9 wins, that to me is kind of Wisconsin football.
I feel like you gotta be like, I would say 1 every 3 years, 1 every 5 years you're in the playoff, or 2 every 5 years. I feel like would be like, I think that's a fair expectation for Wisconsin and Luke Fickell. Be in the playoff 2 every 5 years, which means be most years a top 4 Big Ten team. I don't think it's crazy unfair.
Okay. So if you want to say Wisconsin's a top 4 Big Ten team, let me give you these schools: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, USC, Washington. Like, who are you?
I get it. It's tough. No, I'm not saying it's easy at all. We're seeing Indiana capitalize right now. We'll see what the direction of Michigan is, if they can kind of get up after what's been a down year. I'm not saying it's likely or it's easy, but I think if you're like, that's why like every 2 or 3 years, if we're talking about just a playoff run, I think it's fair because you can load up your roster. You can maybe go in the portal and get a quarterback or receiver that kind of finishes the job off. Like, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect Wisconsin in a given year to, like, they go 10-2. That should be good enough. And I get a lot of those double-digit wins came in the Big Ten West, and now all of a sudden the Big Ten West is dead. But like we're seeing with Indiana, for example, like the schedule works out to where you can get a break, right? And I think the thing for Wisconsin is when you get breaks, you have to capitalize. You may have a year,
I think you just hit the nail on the head right there. In the mega conference era of college football, it may literally come down to who you play based on what is your schedule that year.
I mean, look, Indiana's now benefiting.
Look at the SEC. Look at Texas's schedule versus Georgia's. Very
true. You're not wrong. You're 100% right about that. And so, and that's why I think if you're Wisconsin, I think it's fair to say, okay, if you get maybe 1 year only Ohio State, or you get Ohio State and Indiana, or whatever, Oregon and Penn State, one at home, like I think it's fair to say, okay, can you go 1-1 in those games? Win most, I don't think it's crazy every 2-3 years to say they should be 10-2 and right there knock on the door. But right now with Luke Fickell, they've been 12-11. They're 8-8 in the Big Ten, and he's 0-7 right now against ranked teams. Now, a lot of that has to do with the lack of offense, for sure. Again, the defense played really well against Oregon's offense. So now can you find a quarterback, and can you find a system that works? To answer the question I asked you before, Tripp, this does feel like, fair or not, Luke Fickell's really the last chance at a good OC here. I think if we're talking about an offense that in a year and a half, 2 years from now is still spinning their wheels like they are right now, I don't know if he gets a chance at a crack at hiring a third OC.
This discussion's gone sideways so many times, I forgot the original question.
I know. There's a lot of tentacles here coming out. But either way, Wisconsin now looking for a new OC under Luke Fickell after Phil Longo fired, as they try to pick up the pieces here and try to get some sort of stability going ahead here. Tripp. Speaking of stability, okay, maybe USC has found some quarterback here, Tripp. They beat Nebraska. Jayden Maiava actually looked very good. You know, maybe I got to eat my words here with what I said a few weeks ago when talking about how the quarterback was not the biggest problem with USC. I mean, I still believe that, but you saw a different looking offense with Maiava under center compared to Miller Moss. He totals 4 touchdowns. USC beats Nebraska 28-20. What do you think right now about Maiava's debut?
What kind of language are we allowed to use on the podcast?
Oh, let it rip. I mean,
that's because they ran the ball. They ran the bleeping ball. 31 runs. Woody Marks 146 yards. USC averaged 6 yards per carry against a really good Nebraska rushing defense. I thought this might be the case when they changed quarterbacks. They might also change the identity of their offense a little bit. They ran the ball. They might have the best running back in the Big Ten. They ran the ball. So yes, he was a significant factor, obviously played a very strong game, but also the mindset and the identity change to run the ball was a big difference for USC.
I have a run the damn ball hat in my room. It's too far to get, but I wish I could bring that out for you, and maybe we'll send it to Lincoln Riley.
I don't think a 4-letter phrase that starts with D is enough in this one. Like run the F.
Would you change that 4-letter ball?
I would change that. Lincoln Riley. That's what you got to do.
USC fans bring some signs, you're saying, to the Rose Bowl on Saturday to send a message to what the offense should look like. Wow, this is strong from you, Tripp. You are usually level-headed, measured to use profanity on a family pod.
I didn't say it. I didn't say it. I thought it.
Explaining what Tripp was trying to say to your kids there.
I didn't say it.
Here we go. So there we go. We'll just replace damn with, a different word. We'll get the Tripp version here soon.
Run the effing ball. I got a hat yesterday too. I got my honorary. I'm still wearing my Eagles hat, but my honorary member of the Bills Mafia hat right here. Look at
big question. Everyone's thinking it.
Yeah.
Did you go full Bills Mafia here? Did you go through a table?
No, I did not go through a table. I enjoyed the game. It is interesting going to a game where you don't really have. I'm probably one of the few people that's not from Kansas City that tolerates the Chiefs, but when you don't have a rooting interest in the game, like I really didn't care who won. I like Mahomes. I respect Mahomes. I like Kelsey, love Andy Reid. For me to see, I've seen Brady, Manning, Mahomes, Allen, see them all in person now. That to me was cool. It was a great environment, great game. All I could ask for was a great game. Bills fans are nuts. It is. And the setting there where you drive up through the neighborhoods and all of a sudden the stadium's there and people are just parking in front yards, backyards. They have, porta potties, people just selling it. Like you can't even describe it. There's not really, because the new stadium being built, there's not really big parking lots around the stadium. People are just squeezing as many cars into houses into their own yards as possible. And then these houses, they bring in a porta potty, charge $50 a car, and you tailgate in people's yards.
That's great. So is that what you did? You tailgate in someone's front yard?
Yeah.
That's
backyard,
wild.
But yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's Buffalo.
It was really cool.
Wow.
It was Buffalo. It is quintessential Buffalo. It is quintessential Buffalo. And the stadium, the stadium's a dump. It's like it has no modern amenities. It's a bad college stadium. It's kind of what it reminds you of. But the people stood the whole game. They wanted that game from the Chiefs, and they beat Kansas City in the regular season to give them an opportunity at home field in the postseason. It came down to I couldn't ask for anything better. It was a great experience in balmy Buffalo yesterday.
That's true. You did get a good weather day. It could have been freezing out there. Look at you. Part of Bills Mafia. Brian Tripp. Again, maybe next time let's go through a table, but otherwise I'm glad to see you are in one piece. You don't want to go to Pinto Ron's tailgate and get mustard and ketchup thrown on you? You know what I'm talking about? You
Actually,
ever see that guy?
no, I've never heard of that. And then the thought of
Oh.
mustard alone makes me just seeing it bothers me.
There's a Bills fan, his name is Pinto Ron. Every game he has like a tailgate in a corner where like one of the traditions is everyone douses him in ketchup and mustard. I don't know how it started. I don't know why he does it, but I mean, I'm assuming he doesn't go into the game. I hope not. Imagine sitting next to that guy who has ketchup and mustard all over him. I would go home. But yeah, that's I think a pretty popular Bills tailgate spot. So I'm glad to see you weren't doused in condiments.
Yeah.
Disappointing to go through a table, especially a table that's lit on fire. Bills Mafia is, like you said, crazy, but very cool. Good for you, Tripp. Very, very cool. And I would agree with what you said. Run the damn ball if you're Lincoln Riley. It worked out. Maybe this will actually have him help USC going forward. Interesting about the Trojans, though, coming out of this game is what we learned on Sunday, Tripp. And that is they had a big recruiting flip here, if you will. Julian Lewis, a guy that they've had now for almost 2 years, August of 2023, the number 2 quarterback, number 2 player in all the 2025 class, was committed there for, again, since 2023 of August, decommitted on Sunday. And almost immediately, you had USC flip Texas A&M 5-star recruit Husan Longstreet. So now they go from one 5-star to another. Is there anything here for you? Is this kind of no harm, no foul since you were able to replace Julian Lewis, or is there maybe a bigger concern here for USC in the direction of the program?
Well, USC has lost 6 commitments from the ESPN 300. That part stands out to me. This one, it almost seemed like maybe it was. And what is
like predictable?
It almost seemed no, not predictable. That both moves were kind of in concert, right? Like you knew this was going to happen, so you already had this in the works, or premeditated where you kind of wanted this to happen for whatever reason, because you have this guy, no matter what the ratings are, this is who we really wanted. Hey, why don't you, this seemed premeditated in some way, that it doesn't just happen that quickly, you would think, that often. This seemed like it was something that was in the works for a little bit.
It was, I think, in real time. It had to be like 20 minutes in terms of the Julian Lewis decommitment, the Longstreet commitment.
I don't think that's coincidental.
I would agree. You've seen USC make a push for Longstreet. They attended his I think high school game on Friday. He's from the backyard in Southern California, so that's at least a big get for them. For me, Tripp, I'm not concerned right now about the future of USC, but I will be depending on where Lewis goes. This is, again, the number 2 overall player, the number 2 quarterback. He is highly sought after. He spent his Saturday in Athens watching Georgia, Tennessee. He's from Georgia. If you lose Julian Lewis, if you're Lincoln Riley, and he goes, down the road to Georgia, I think, okay, you know what? Fine. Like that sucks, but hometown kid, he stays local. I think it's nothing you can do. But the other 2 schools rumored to be, in the mix right now to get Julian Lewis, Colorado, Indiana. I think that's a really bad sign if you're USC, despite the Longstreet commitment here and going from one 5-star to another, that you had the number 2 overall quarterback under Lincoln Riley, who all Lincoln Riley has done in his entire career as a head coach, has produced first-round quarterbacks, has produced Heisman winners, Heisman finalists, right? Like, there's no question about his quarterback development. And you had a QB instead say, you know what, I'm going to pass on that and all that history. I'm instead going to go to play for Coach Prime at Colorado, or I'm going to go play for Curt Cignetti at Indiana. That to me would raise a red flag. That would raise a big red flag on the direction of the program and what recruits right now are thinking about Lincoln Riley. Because you lose one to Kirby Smart, again, Georgia kid, fine. I think you just say accept it.
Yep.
You cannot lose a recruit if you're USC to Indiana, Colorado. No disrespect to either program. You can have it happen. And that's where I think, for me, the panic meter or the real intrigue comes on where Lewis decides to play his football. I think that will, for me at least, that will help me conclude whether there's actual real concern or whether it's classic recruiting and you just lost to a bigger dog.
Speaking of concern, let's take this game from the other angle. Nebraska, its 9th straight loss when facing bowl eligibility dating back to 2019. Dylan Raiola, 27 for 38, 191 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks. He struggled reading the field. The one offensive touchdown of the day, right? They only had one the whole day. They had the pick 6 and blocked field goal. We didn't expect Dana Holgorsen to come in 1 week and a bye week, change anything. but obviously still trending in the wrong direction for Nebraska.
It is. And you mentioned didn't read the field well. And that to me is like a concern because forget Holgerson for a second, right? Like there are just some things that you as a quarterback have to do. I know he's a true freshman. He's still learning. But there was one sequence for Nebraska in the second half where Raiola was faking a screen down in the red zone, and he had a wide open receiver. And I believe it was Brock Heward that was doing the call in the game. He pointed out and goes, you got like he's wide open. Like why aren't you throwing that? He was looking in the direction. I'm assuming he saw the receiver. Again, you can't not when your vision is to the left and you have a receiver open. He didn't do it. Instead, end up in a throwaway. Nebraska settles for a field goal. Like it's like simple decisions like that, Tripp, where it doesn't matter who's calling the plays. It's just more like see a guy throw it. He didn't do it. I think maybe there's some hesitation. There's some second guessing. And again, he's young, so maybe that's just natural. He's, the team is struggling right now. So maybe he's just having himself, having doubts. 2 more interceptions in this game, which is concerning. He's not been able to hold on to the ball. The last one came on the last play of the game, which you could argue maybe should have been pass interference. I saw a lot of jersey tugging there on Nebraska's receiver that was not called. But a game in which Nebraska, like again, offensively, you weren't going to see overhauls and drastic changes. But again, now you start to get nervous here, Tripp. Like you mentioned, 9 L's in a row when you're bowl eligible or ability to get bowl eligible. You got 2, Wisconsin, Iowa, not exactly cakewalks here. You already lost to UCLA at home, so it's not like, Nebraska can just assume they can win any of these games. There's a lot of pressure right now. This would be a disaster. Obviously, an absolute disaster if they lose out here and miss out on a bowl for the second straight year in which you get to 5 wins if you're Matt Rule and can't close the deal.
Well, they had so much momentum, too. It's crazy we're having this discussion because previously the discussion was, could this be a team that has college football playoff aspirations? And to fall this far, that's what's really striking about it for Nebraska. And I think they're losing the goodwill and positive momentum the program had. I shouldn't say that. I think some people had false expectations and aspirations that it was going to come easily and naturally for them based on Matt Rule's track record. But if you look at the program's track record, I thought a bowl eligible season was a good year for Nebraska and a real step in the right direction. I still think it is. They're recruiting some better talent than they have in the past. And I think Matt Rule's a good football coach, but they're losing some of that momentum and goodwill here. That's what's concerning to me about Nebraska. Crazy that we're even having this discussion.
You're right. Like bowl eligible would have been a good year. I assumed that would have come easily. Like I was one of those we talked about earlier. Like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid of this team's going to start 7-0. Like they should be bowl eligible by October. Here we are.
I thought it was going to be Nebraska, not Indiana.
Yeah, you're right. But I think doesn't that like make it even worse? If you look at some of the turnarounds for some of these programs, you're like, well, how are they having instant success? And we're still sitting here sputtering our wheels.
I think it sets unrealistic expectations. I think Indiana has never had a year like this. They haven't done it since 1967. It is such an anomaly. What Mel Tucker did and the staying power at Michigan State proves it. It is anomaly. It is an anomaly. And I don't think you can reasonably expect all of your programs or your program or any program to duplicate Indiana's success this year. It's just unreasonable and unrealistic. And look, people are going to expect it, but it is not the norm. It's an exception to the norm.
Let's talk realistic expectations, Tripp, because I think what we saw on Saturday in West Lafayette, everybody expected it. And Penn State, boy, did they deliver here. 49-10. They hammer the Boilermakers. You were obviously on the sideline for that game. Look, a game that we were laughing about, the 20.5 point spread. Neither of us thought it was going to be close. It was not. Any takeaways, though, from this game as Penn State rolls and they move now to a 9-1?
Credit them for going out and taking care of business still. And that was kind of my impression as I watched it at field level, is it's still something to go out and take care. You had 2 emotional weeks at home, the Ohio State loss, the whiteout win against Washington. I think everyone's looking at those last 3 games for Penn State and identifying Minnesota at Minnesota, 3:30 kickoff this week as their most difficult game remaining. All this noise of win out, you're going to be playing at home in the playoffs. Playoff tickets have gone on sale for Beaver Stadium. But to still go out and dominate in the fashion in which they did, incredibly impressive. My biggest takeaway, it's hard to have too many because like Singleton didn't have that many touches. I think they limited his action and his snaps in the running game. Same with Allen. how great Tyler Warren is and what he means to the offense, and where would they be without Tyler Warren in this offense right now? Because they're still not. And when I interviewed James Franklin at halftime, my question was, well, how do you even come up with all these different ways to get the guy the ball? Because we saw them snap it through his legs on a play that was a design snap back to the quarterback, the double pass that he took it into the end zone, the run that he had. And he said, I don't want to talk about Tyler Warren. It's not the time and place. We got to figure out how to get our receivers more touches. And they still weren't able to. And they haven't been a factor in the passing game. I think there's two takeaways from this. Number one, how impressive Warren is and what he means. I think Penn State is as well-rounded and complete a football team as there is in the country. I think Penn State, though, to win a big game in the playoffs is going to need either a receiver still, and we've talked about it, to step up, and they might just not have that. They might not. If it can't come from there, they're going to need Nicholas Singleton to be that guy. They need someone else on offense besides Drew Aller, who deserves way more credit than he's getting this year.
Agreed.
They need, besides Drew Aller and Tyler Warren, they need someone else. Like Katron Allen's made a couple, Singleton's made a couple, Wallace had a game, Clifford had a game, Fleming's made a couple, but who else, when they line up offensively, who is a defense going to look at and say, we need to stop that guy? Because right now it's just 44. And until 44, there's someone else to complement him. I think Penn State's got a chance to make a deep, deep run. I think they're as good as anybody. I think they're well-rounded. I think their quarterback is playing at an extremely, extremely high level. And their defense is playing at a high level. I think they have an exceptional offensive coordinator, an exceptional defensive coordinator. I think they've got a really darn good head coach. I think they're playing well on special teams. But who is going to help Warren make the plays down the stretch in a big game? Same discussion we had when they were in the red zone against Ohio State. No doubt Warren should have gotten a touch. But if Warren's taken away, who is going to be that guy that Aller can lean on and a defense has to respect? To me, it's Singleton. He can be that guy. And as he gets healthier, and I think he's back to being healthy, I think he can be that guy, but you'd love to see it from someone else too. That's all they're missing from saying they're as good as anybody in the country right now.
Could not agree more. You need a number one receiver. I mean, Trey Wallace showed you in the West Virginia game, at least you thought he could be that guy to step up, make some big plays. And for the most part, he's really disappeared since week number one. Has not been consistent, had a big drop against Ohio State.
And I think it's hard in this game to really look at numbers and try to gauge too much of it just because of how much they were rotating players in. But Warren, again, for the second time this year, he's been their leading rusher. He was their leading receiver again, to no surprise. Who else? You can't consistently have your quarterback and your tight end being your top two rushers. You can't just consistently rely on it being Warren. Who else is it going to be? And if Penn State gets that, I think they win the national. I think they can win the national championship. I do.
I don't disagree. I don't think it's a homer take either. The problem is right now we've not seen it. And that Ohio State game, you would have loved to see it. And part of the reason why they lost was because even Singleton wasn't able to step up big time for the most part. Warren, in his limited opportunities, played well. No one else stepped up. And you saw, at the end, a 7-point loss at home to a good Ohio State team, in part because there was no other guy that could make their presence felt to make a few plays. In this game, again, you didn't need Warren. He stepped up anyway and played well. I thought it was interesting, Tripp, at halftime, the CBS crew was talking about Tyler Warren's impact. And they were saying, Brian Jones, Rick Neuheisel, amongst others, were saying that they thought Tyler Warren was more valuable to Penn State than Travis Hunter was to Colorado. And we're talking about right now the Heisman favorite, right? In many sports books, Travis Hunter. And I was thinking about it for a while. I said, you know what? I actually agree. It sounds maybe crazy on the top of the head when you think about it, or when you hear it, I should say, but when you think about it, I would agree because kind of what you mentioned, number one, Tyler Warren is the guy for Penn State's offense. There's really nobody else you can rely on at running back or receiver that has consistently stepped up week in and week out the way Warren has. But his versatility, where we've seen him line up under center, in the shotgun, at tight end, out wide, in the backfield, he's literally thrown a pass, caught a pass, snapped the ball, run the ball. We saw the 67-yard touchdown run, outrunning Purdue's defense on Saturday. Where Penn State lines him up and what Andy Kotelnicki is able to do in putting him all over the field and keeping the defense guessing has helped bring Penn State's offense to a different level than where they were last year. and this is no disrespect, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
But like, if you take Travis Hunter off Colorado, I would argue they're not a much different team. He's a really good defensive back, but they don't throw the ball his way anyway. And that defense has gotten better in part because I think their front seven has gotten tougher and stronger. Offensively, he's a dynamic receiver. But Shedeur Sanders is probably going to be the number one quarterback taken, maybe the number one overall pick, and they have talented receivers around him. So it's like if you take Hunter out, and we've seen him miss some games with injury, like that Colorado team can still continue to win and make plays. If you took Tyler Warren Tripp out of Penn State's offense, I mean, you're talking about 14 points maybe difference you're averaging. Like, I think it's a ginormous impact. And I would agree. I think he's more valuable to Penn State than right now Travis Hunter would be to Colorado.
Ooh, that's a really hard argument to make, though, with Hunter playing every snap for Colorado. And why aren't teams throwing his way? Because you can't throw his way. And what he does to open things up on that offense. But it's an interesting discussion because Warren has become Penn State's short yardage guy that they go to. They need a big catch. That's who they go to. Who are teams going to focus on wherever you line him up? He is as important to an offense as a player that we've seen just in recent years. How everything runs. How often do you say it's like Brock Bowers the last couple of years of Georgia? Everything runs through the tight end, and that to me is the simple comparison. Warren has a little bit more versatility with how they line him up, but Penn State really has built an offense that runs through its tight end. And when do you say that?
No, you're right. It's fascinating. And again, Penn State's going to need him, but also you hope that the attention he grabs from other defenses can help, prevent or open up some matchups here for some other receivers and running backs to take advantage of as we get closer and closer to the college football playoff. Let's wrap up the pod here, Tripp. There's just a few quick whip around notes and observations here. Another game that was a blowout that was not, a shock, but the venue was cool. Ohio State playing at Wrigley Field, Northwestern there hosting their last few home games at Wrigley Field. It was a cool setting, Tripp. I think it worked well. I'm glad nobody got hurt. That was actually one of the concerns we had going into the game with how tight the end zones were to the wall. But it looked cool. A lot of red. I thought we'd see a little bit more purple in the stands. A lot of red.
They could have put Ohio State Buckeyes in the end zones, and it would have been an Ohio State home game.
Ohio State traveled really well. That was a sick setting, though.
It was. And Northwestern announcing today, ESPN's Adam Rittenberg had a really good story on it. Some more details with their new stadium, which will open in 2026. $850 million, mostly privately funded by the Ryan family. Still going to be called Ryan Field. But what they did was model this, and in the article, it goes into pretty good length about it, modeling the stadium after an NFL stadium or soccer stadiums where it's more tiered and layered, and you're able to engineer it so the seats, instead of arching and going back away from the playing surface, they're trying to create better than TV sight lines for those that are attending the game. And you get that close proximity where you're out over the field a little bit more. And in the article, one of the designers, Ryan, said, our worst seat in the stadium is 100 feet closer to the field than the most expensive seat at Michigan's Big House. So I'm actually, it's a different model. It's a 35,000 seat stadium, which will create a little bit of demand for the tickets. It's a different model, but it's going to be loud. They're going to have a canvas overhang, a canopy overhang that's going to keep the sound in and protect fans from the elements. There will still be open air in the middle of the stadium. But I think it's going to be a really unique setting and probably one that works for Northwestern. And it'll be interesting to see if other schools, now, not your Penn States, Ohio States, Oregons of the world, but other schools that size would start to maybe follow that model a little bit more. And obviously being based in Chicago, it opens them up to other revenue opportunities through the other structures and amenities that the stadium will have.
Hearing you explain that, what it reminds me of? The Intuit Dome with the Clippers.
Yeah, I think that's a great model.
And I was going to say, so far, it seems very successful. The wall is cool.
Yeah.
You see all the modern technology, the how close the seats are. Credit Northwestern. Like, they're doing this right. It's, again, if you're going to practice or play at a practice facility for 2 years, at least make the stadium worth it. And like you said, these latest renderings make it definitely seem like this is going to be a sick place to play and a destination for all fans. I mean, no disrespect to Ryan Field. It's not like fans from other Big Ten schools were clamoring to go to Northwestern to check out Ryan Field.
I was there last year. And I was hosting a post-game show for Penn State after the game. and we had to run an Ethernet line out of one of their old ticket offices, and it was a shack. And where we were set up was right outside the Penn State locker room. Well, the locker room for Penn State was too small. They had to set chairs for players up outside of the locker room. Coaches had to meet outside of the locker room on what was kind of a guarded concourse, but also in that space was where they were wheeling all the trash to different dumpsters. I mean, it was a dump. It was a dump. Not that college football stadiums aren't typically kind of dumpy, but it was a dump.
It was the king of all dumps, huh? Like you said, there are plenty of dumps, but that takes the cake. At least credit to Northwestern here for improving. Really fast here, Tripp, before we do to get out of here. You had Washington on Friday night become bowl eligible. They take down UCLA 31-19.
Where was that game?
Becoming bowl eligible.
Where was the Washington game played? Yeah, where was it played?
Oh, Seattle.
They won. Shocker. They were at home. Okay.
You know what? I picked UCLA. I immediately regretted it when I saw the blackout uniforms for Washington. Those are sleek. Those look good.
Washington uniforms at home is a lock. They're a lock.
That it is.
I picked them, right?
Against...
I picked them, right?
I think we both were on UCLA. But I know, at least for me, I picked UCLA for sure.
I think here. Yeah, Washington at home. You got to take them.
Yeah, it's a lock. And someone's got to sign smart in the pod. You know, it's not me. So you definitely picked Washington without a doubt. They become bowl eligible. Rutgers as well becomes bowl eligible 31-17 over Maryland. And how about Illinois here, Tripp? They go to 7-3. They take down Michigan State on senior day 38-16. And we'll see in the college football playoff rankings, but we saw them creep back up in the top 25 in the AP. Brett Bielema, again, quietly here. They've played a really consistent season and a nice bounce back after kind of going through a lull here in the last few weeks.
How about the text I sent you? And this also came from Adam Rittenberg. He put this out yesterday. Illinois re-entering the AP top 25. Among 3 lost teams, the Illini actually have an interesting college football playoff profile because of quality losses. Of 9 3-loss teams to finish in the top 12 of the final college football playoff standings, Illinois is currently second in record of the opponents it lost to. And this is among teams in the top 12 that have been 3-loss teams. So it's difficult and rare to see a 3-loss team reach the top 12, but I think we're trending towards it perhaps this year and in the future with the new unbalanced schedules among the power conferences. Illinois, right now, record of losses is 26-5, 11-0 Oregon, 9-1 Penn State, and 6-4 Minnesota. That's it. Compared to this year's college football playoff 3-loss teams, Missouri 23-7. Again, Illinois 26-5, Missouri 23-7, South Carolina 22-8, Kansas State 21-9. There is an argument, certainly for Illinois, that they deserve, if we're going to go on quality losses versus quality wins, that they deserve some merit to be in the top 20 of the college football playoff rankings this week. And you start to look historically where it stands. But interesting stat, you can find the tweet from Adam Rittenberg if you want to look at the entire chart. But certainly something interesting, as you pointed out, with the Illini.
And two, I mean, look, I know it like they played early in the season and it's not gone well since, but you beat a ranked Kansas early in the season. You go on the road to beat a ranked Nebraska early in the season. It's not like they've beaten nobody, like they have better, they have some quality wins. And now you're seeing Kansas, by the way, playing better. Look, the record stinks. I think they're like 3-6, 4-6. So you're not going to look at Kansas and say, oh, quality win. But nice that the Jayhawks 2 weeks in a row, by the way, knock off a ranked team. Iowa State last week, BYU this week. Like that's a good football team. And Illinois was able to beat them. Like that's a team where you talk about brand bias. Like, and we look at it from the top, right? Indiana and some of these other schools, when you're looking at the top 10, top 12. But even Illinois, who, by the way, can do favors here for almost every other Big Ten team. I know Penn State desperately needs Illinois to crack those top 25 rankings here to get a ranked win on their resume. Couldn't help, or couldn't hurt Oregon as well. But you look at how they're playing, like they are a really tough team. This has been a really good year for Brett Bielema. It continues here, and I'm glad they're getting some recognition here in terms of the voters, because, like you said, it's not just their record, but also they've played some really tough teams. And outside of that, I mean, look, Minnesota was not a great loss. Other than that, though, they've taken care of business and played really well. So we'll see where they do land here in the top 12 or in the top 25, I should say, the college football playoff rankings when those do come out on Tuesday. And we should gear up, Tripp. Assuming chaos does not happen, we should be ready for a top 5 matchup in the shoe on Saturday. Indiana, Ohio State. Let's go. Big game.
That's what we'll talk about.
Covered.
Yeah, we'll talk about that on Thursday.
Oh, you know it. To make sure you subscribe wherever you get your pods. Make sure you subscribe wherever or subscribe on YouTube, I should say. If you do want to watch the pod as well, tell your friends. We got some good pods coming here as the Big Ten season, regular season at least, is starting to wind down. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.